For the Mackenzie Institute, safety and security is a broad topic. The food supply, the water supply, power. We have buildings that are BREEAM, LEED construction, and we have buildings that are net zero. They generate their own electricity. But then we have concerns about the grid, the fraying wires between Americans and our energy future. Well, on this Throwback Thursday, let's take a look at alternative energy. Hello, I'm Alan Bonner, and welcome to At Issue. Today on the program, we're discussing alternate energy. Now, we have tons of hydroelectric power and hydroelectric capacity in this country. We know that. Joyce, is that clean? Is that one of the great alternatives to fossil fuels?
Well, it is clean, but it does have environmental impacts because every time you build a large dam in particular, you often displace people, especially in remote areas. We're talking about displacing Aboriginal people. There's an impact on the ecosystem in terms of fish and all sorts of things like that. So yes, it's cleaner than fossil fuels, but there are impacts that you need to consider.
Now, what about these little run-of-the-river plants, little turbines, maybe, the size of somebody's house? That won't displace people. Is that a good idea?
I think that's a great idea.
And so why aren't we doing more of them?
Well, that's a very good question, and that's why we're here. Because we think that, governments need to start listening to these kinds of issues. Generally speaking, in Canada, our electricity system has been run through very, very large mega projects. And there is now a move towards getting smaller projects on the electricity grid, and also with an emphasis on conservation first and efficiency first, so that we don't have to build new plants. So we need to look at that first and foremost. But then I think the real wave is to look at smaller distributed generation. So instead of these large plants, which then have long distances between, the actual facility and the consumers, we need to start putting energy supply into communities where people actually live and do work.
I think it was no less than Gerald Ford about 35 years ago who announced the construction of 200 new nuclear plants in America. Some people of goodwill have said, in the best of a bad lot of alternatives, nuclear is something that we should be using to generate our power. We do in New Brunswick, little wee bit in Quebec, lots in Ontario, and the uranium comes from Saskatchewan. So what's the Canadian perspective on nuclear? Good idea or what?
Nuclear definitely, I would suggest, has its place. And I know the Ontario plan is to continue with the existing nuclear plants and sustain them, keep them going, keep them operating. But basically any new growth is to come from other sources. There is the issue we're talking about running out of oil and natural gas. Well, they're also talking about running out of uranium. So the question then happens, what happens to the nuclear plants when we run out of uranium?
I come from a different perspective. I'm prepared to take the nuclear industry on. I don't think we should be building any more nuclear plants in Canada for a couple of reasons. There's obviously large environmental impacts associated with nuclear, right from the uranium mining stage to the waste, which we don't have any kind of answer for. There's lots of effort and money being spent at looking at what we should do with our nuclear waste, but at this point in time, there is no solution to that, and there won't be a solution to that, because nobody really wants nuclear waste in their community. Not only that, but nuclear power is an extremely expensive form of electricity generation. It's dangerous. It's this highly radioactive waste, as mentioned. But not only that, it's an expensive technology, and the public is paying for that in not just on their hydro bill, but in many other aspects of how we pay bills in our society right now. So I suggest that we need to replace our nuclear power facilities with renewables in the future. That's the direction we should be going in. Nuclear should be last on the list, not first.
All right, quick punctuation mark on the issue of solar, and let me go through the table the other direction this time. Do we have enough sun in this country? And what percentage of our energy requirements would solar produce, do you think?
We have more than enough sun. The records show we have about 20% more than Germany on average, and Germany has the world's largest solar industry and solar uptake in it. So case there is not debatable.
Okay. Do we have enough wind?
Absolutely.
And what percentage would that produce of our needs, do you think?
Well, I'd say minimum 20%.
You mentioned Europe. In Cyprus, in Greece, in a lot of parts of the sunny parts of Europe, you see passive solar, I think, a great big tank on top of people's homes. Yep. Sometimes they paint it black. I hope that's not a cliche. It attracts more sunlight if
it's absolutely
paint it
true.
black. Why don't we see this all across this country on every cottage roof?
It's a really great question. Like, that is political will, Alan. Like, we should have, in my view, that's where our building codes should be going, is a requirement that every new structure that gets built in Canada have a solar hot water system on it. It's a total no-brainer.
25 years ago, we were talking about when is the payback for insulation in the roof and the basement? Is it really worth it? And of course, no one would ask that question today. It's an attitudinal thing. Of course you insulate your home. Is that where we're going with this, do you think?
Well, I think you've raised the first principle, which is that we need to be focusing on conservation and efficiency of our homes and businesses first and foremost, even before we consider renewable energy. Because we are enormously wasteful as Canadians, and we all recognize that. It's been documented all over the place by various organizations that will point to
we're one of the worst.
Yeah, we're one of the worst. So we need to increase our codes and standards. So because if we were to do so, we could. I would guess that we could probably increase the efficiency of our homes and businesses by a third, right, by using technologies that are off the shelf right now today. So that's the first point. Second one is that in terms of renewables, I think we need to see the shift in public policy that supports the interest that we know is out there in Canadians to actually adopt these things, to put them in their homes, to utilize them, to become familiar with them. We need a lot of education too.
We've been skirting this issue of public policy the whole show. I do a lot of traveling in Canada. I see our legislatures, I see our public buildings, our art galleries. I do not see solar and wind generating devices on them. Isn't the most expeditious thing that a government can do is use its own purchasing power to come to you folks, buy your gizmos, and be a leader in that area? Why doesn't that happen? Joyce, you've been on this issue all program. Why doesn't that happen?
Well, it is starting to happen, and I can tell you that within the City of Toronto is actually trying to put its own dollars on the table and start procuring some of these technologies. There are a couple of very small solar panels that sit atop of Toronto City Hall. It's a start, but some of the facilities that they own are actually utilizing solar hot water systems now. And they the City of Toronto was extremely supportive in allowing Toronto Hydro and Windshare Cooperative to site a wind turbine on public property.
With great affection, respect, and even love for the City of Toronto, Joyce, that's one turbine.
Yes.
It is one grass roof that I know of, and it is a couple of solar panels. I mean, I live downtown, and in the cities I go visit, I don't see this stuff on the roofs. Andrew.
If I may point out, we've actually done 11 solar thermal systems for the City of Toronto, one of which is the largest pool heating system in Canada. That's on the Jimmy Simpson Rec Centre. So the City of Toronto has been making an effort, and they have plans to put in another 20 or so systems, but it's all money spent up front, so it's not an easy thing to do necessarily.
I'm Alan Bonner. Thank you. Any views expressed here are not necessarily those of the Mackenzie Institute, its speakers, sponsors, or supporters. But the Institute is dedicated to fostering public discussion, debate, and education about security matters. Google the Mackenzie Institute to join the discussion. The Mackenzie Institute is grateful to its sponsors and supporters. Some of our short pods and long talks are a result of the support of Heathbridge Capital Management Limited, the National Post, and Dundurn Publishing.